This has been a long trek with Jesus here. We've been in, since we started in Mark 8, we've been in what's called a travel discourse with Jesus. Every gospel of the synoptic gospels has one. Matthew and Mark and Luke, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have one. And in Mark, it started in 8:22, and that was the part where they left, where they'd been going back and forth across the lake, and then they started out into the hinterland, as it were, going down through the plain of Galilee and other places. And that was the place where Jesus first said that I'm going to be crucified. You remember we spoke about that last week. And that's where he's confronted. But the curious thing is when they first started that trip, Jesus encountered a blind man. And you may remember this blind man because we kind of chuckled about it, because it's the one where Jesus used some of his spit in the dirt. You remember, and he put it on the guy's eyes, had the guy wash it off, and Jesus said, "Can you see?" And the guy said, "Well, I can see people, but they kind of look like trees." So Jesus touched his eyes a second time, and then he could see clearly. And then, so it started with Jesus healing blindness. And then Jesus went all these different places. 3 times he foretold that he was going to be turned over, beaten, and crucified, and killed. And then this week, he's trekking up towards Jerusalem. That's where we're at in Mark. That's where we're at in the book. He's ending his travel about, his walkabout, if you're Australian. And he's headed towards Jerusalem now. And he's going to go through Jericho first. Now, for those of you that don't know this geographically, from out in the when you're out there in Judea in the countryside, you would go through Jericho and then Bethpage, and then you'd get into the Bethany, and then you'd hit Jerusalem. Okay, so these are the cities that we know about as we're reading like the Palm Sunday narratives and stuff like that, where Jesus is going to Jerusalem. We're in Mark, we're going to end this travel about time when they're going through the city of Jericho or just leaving Jericho. So we're going to pick up the reading tonight in Mark chapter 10, and we're going to read from 46 through 52. This is going to end the wandering around of Jesus and his disciples. And I want to point out a couple things for you to listen for. First of all, I don't know if any of you caught this or not, but in Mark, Mark uses 2 references. He uses disciples, and he uses the 12. When he uses the phraseology of the disciples, he's talking about the general crowd of people that were following him. Okay? The 12 speak specifically to the 12 that we know he called, and we know who they are. Okay, so I want you to hear for what the disciples are doing in this. And I want you to listen carefully what the disciples are doing in this. And I want you to hear what Jesus does in this in response to what they are doing. And I want you to listen for immediacy, because we're going to go back and visit that in just a minute. So let's pick up in verse 46, chapter 10. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." He uses the word Rabboni, actually. "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. The gospel message for God's people. Thanks be to God indeed. Okay, so they're moving along. Jesus has already told the 12 now that he's going to be killed and crucified 3 times. He tells that to the 12. Although at one point when he's telling some of the disciples what's going to happen, a bunch of people fell away, right? We remember that part. Well, there's still a pretty good crowd going with him. And did you hear that part where they're walking along and this beggar? Now in those days, if you were blind, it was figured that you had done something sinful and God struck you, or your parents did something sinful and that's why you were born blind, or something happened, but something about you wasn't quite right with God, that's why you were blind. And those folks weren't allowed in the temple. They weren't allowed to go worship and pray in the temple. They were considered unclean. And for them, about the only way they could subsist was by begging. And so here was this guy begging on the side of the road. And these are Jesus people. Jesus people. Telling him, dude, shut up. We're moving along here. Just be quiet. Be quiet with all that. And he hollers louder, right? And Jesus hears him. But it's funny what he says. We have not heard before in the book of Mark anybody referring to Jesus, not even the disciples, referring to Jesus as Son of David. This is the first time that appears. So something about Bartimaeus knows a little something about the prophecies, about who the Messiah is supposed to be, that the Messiah is supposed to come from the lineage of David. This is well known in Hebrew and Israel, Jewish circles, okay? They knew this. Somehow he had managed to get some teaching. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. He didn't care about these people that are telling him no. And these are Jesus people telling him to be quiet and no and don't bother him. There's a message in there for us. I hope you all are hearing it. It should be screaming pretty loud about now. But Jesus says, call him over. Did you see how quick the people turned? When Jesus says, call him over. Oh, hey, good fellow, come on. He wants to see you get up. It's okay. Come on now. Just a few minutes before, they'd been telling him, shut up. And now they're saying, cheer up, good fellow, come on. I mean, what is it with Jesus' disciples? What is it with Jesus people? That one minute we can be so shut up and go away with all that. And the next minute, oh, come on, be of good cheer. What is up with that? It's scriptural. I mean, the fact that we may do it is not necessarily a surprise because it was written a long time ago that it happened then with Jesus on the road. It wasn't like now where he's been in heaven for 2,000 years and so, you know, it's not like he's standing next to us when we're telling those people to go away from my car. Go away, dude. Don't bother me with all that panhandling stuff. But then as soon as Jesus says, call him over here. Oh, good. Okay, well, come on. It's all good. Did y'all see anything about like fit in any modern context? I mean, when these words were jumping off the page at me. I mean, I've been a part of doing it. I know everybody probably has. But just this one little part, it reaches out and smacks us. So, because one minute we're driving down the road and we're seeing somebody at an intersection, that dude's faking. He probably makes $60,000 a year doing this. And then another 8 blocks down the road, we see another guy or a woman. We think, oh. So we give them something. What happened to our heart between one and the other? Did Jesus say, call them over or help them out, or did something just snap in us? I don't know. But it's curious what happened when Jesus said, call him over. And they go or say, come, good fellow. They say he threw his cloak down and got up. Well, okay. If you're a blind beggar in Judea, on the road outside of Jericho, how many possessions do you think you got? A cloak. That's all you got. That's all you got. And they probably laid it out in front of him like on cross legs, right? So you could throw the money in it, right? To catch the money so he could feel it because he's blind, he can't see nothing. So he would throw it in the cloak. He gets up and throws his cloak down. Now, that cloak may have had a little pocket or something where he was stashing the money or something, I don't know. But the point is he threw all his possessions down. That's the part we want to hear. He threw his possessions down and he jumped up because Jesus wanted to see him. And you remember the last time Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? That's when James and John said, like a kid, Jesus, if we ask you for something, will you give it to us? Setting him up, trying to trick him. He said, what do you want me to do for you? But this is a totally different context, right? But Jesus asked the same question. I don't know that this guy's request was necessarily any less selfish than theirs. Because theirs was probably about security, and this guy's is about healing, but it's something selfish. He says, I want to see. And Jesus said, your faith has made you well. And immediately, the guy could see. Do y'all remember the last time we heard immediately in the book of Mark? Nobody? How about Mark chapter 1? When Jesus, right after he'd been baptized and all that, then he walks by the Sea of Galilee and he says, come follow me. And the disciples dropped their nets and immediately followed him. It's the last time we heard immediately. So what is it about immediately with Jesus? You ever thought about that? What immediately means to Jesus? I mean, we know what immediately means, right? Right now. In the Marines, they say, do it now. You know, so it's like right now, immediately. And they did. They dropped their nets and followed Jesus. And this guy was immediately healed. And what did he do? Followed Jesus. Doesn't say he went back and picked up his cloak. I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe he could see what that thing really looked like and he didn't want it anymore. I don't know. But the point is, he left everything to follow Jesus. Now, if we go back in the story, back to when the disciples were called, and they immediately followed Jesus, I think their story that we've been hearing about since Pentecost more closely resembles our own. You know, we immediately, something about the Jesus story hits us, and it hits us just right in our heart. We feel the conviction of our sin debt, and so we accept Jesus and the forgiveness, and so that's the part, like John Wesley told us, we're justified in that moment. We're justified because we're pardoned by God, because we accepted what Jesus did for us. And Paul spoke about that in Romans. We're justified when we accept what Jesus did for us. We have full pardon from God for all of our sins. And then we move on. But as we move on, we bring us with us. And us is a mess. You know what? I tried this geographical cure thing a long time ago in my life. I thought, well, if I just move, like from Little Rock to Dallas or something, I can leave all this baggage behind. I can start a new life. But the problem was, no matter where I went, there I was. And it took me a little while to figure out that I was the problem. See, Jesus already knows I'm the problem. He already knows you're the problem. He already knows where the problem lies. The problem is we don't know where the problem lies. We think it lies in that person who talked crazy to us. We think it lies into our boss, or it lies in our spouse, or it lies in our parents, or our siblings, or our kids, or something else. Life made me too short, too tall, wrong color. I wish I had different hair. Whatever. But we find something else that's the problem instead of looking within and figuring out that God made us for a purpose. Because see, the whole story isn't really about us. The whole story isn't really about what the disciples do. And the whole story isn't about immediate. The story is about God. God made us to be a certain way. And the immediate part comes into when we recognize that humans had it so wrong, that God had to intersect human history with Jesus Christ to be a living example for us. In his 3-year adult ministry, he laid out for us how we're supposed to get along together, how we're supposed to talk to each other, how we're supposed to love each other, how we're supposed to respond to God, how we're supposed to respond to those in need. Immediately. I think it's that immediately thing gets us, because even though the disciples dropped their nets and left their vocations and immediately followed Jesus, and that part's all good, what did they run into? Following Jesus, what did they run into? They ran into, Jesus, we don't have enough food to feed these people. What are we going to do? And Jesus fed them. Jesus, there's a storm. Don't you care that we're about to drown? And Jesus calmed the storm. Every time they turned around, they were experiencing something about life that gets us all up in arms. All worked up, all stressed out. And Jesus would calm it down. Jesus was always doing something to demonstrate He was there and everything's under control. Humans were manufacturing a lot of problems that didn't have to be made. And so even though Jesus was calling people and they were responding and following Him, one thing He didn't do, He didn't take away their proclivity to go out and invent trouble. That was still on them. He tried to show them the way He lived. He had no place to lay His head every night. He didn't have a job, had no income. For 3 years they watched Him live. And so He demonstrated to them that all this material stuff that we cling to and pursue so devoutly wasn't really what it's all about. Now, I realize that we have to have shelter and food and all those kind of things. But Jesus even said that God provides for the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. We know all this. And somehow Bartimaeus knew all that. Sitting on the side of the road, and he heard Jesus was coming by. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now, do any of us, when we understand Jesus might be close to us, do we shout out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me? I can just see that now. Somebody leaning on the counter in the kitchen. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. I've created such a mess in my life. I need some help now. No, really what we do is we hang our head and we cry in our kitchen with our hands on the counter. We cry, God, I can't do this. God, help me. I can't do this. That's really what we do. Should we shout? I don't know. Our heart's shouting, I think, even if our words aren't. But it's curious that the Jesus people were ebbing and flowing in this story. One moment they're telling Bartimaeus to be quiet. The next moment they're welcoming him in. And it's not about what they did telling him no or welcoming him in. It's about the fact that they're all over the place. That's what that's about. How often are we all over the place? And what would we do? What would we do if Jesus suddenly opened our eyes? If Jesus suddenly opened our eyes to God's truth, to what really mattered, what would we do? I don't have an answer for that, folks. That was totally rhetorical. I do not have an answer for that. I'm just saying, we read examples of Jesus giving sight to blind people. It's in all the Gospels. He gave them their sight back. But how many of us, as we've been going through life at our pace, whatever it was, and suddenly life put up a stop sign. And we had to, what's this all about in the middle of my life? And we realized it was Jesus. It was God putting a stop sign up to stop us, to get our attention. And suddenly we did have our sight restored. We saw that what we were doing wasn't what we were supposed to do. Maybe we went back to church in middle age. Maybe we picked up our Bible for the first time in years. Maybe we'd been going to church for a long time, but somehow things just weren't settling in. Yeah, fine, we've been going to church for 20 years. Basically the same person I was when I got here as now. And if that's been happening to you, if you've been going to church for a long time and you're basically the same person that you were when you got here, I'm telling you, Christianity's not working for you. Because that's not the way Jesus operates. In spite of what we saw and we have seen about the behavior of the disciples throughout Mark, about them just not getting it. And up to this point, they've not getting it. They get a flat out F on discipleship this far in Mark, the book of Mark. But yet we have examples of people like this guy, Bartimaeus, jumped up and going to follow Jesus. Now, granted, he probably didn't have a better gig. Okay, at the moment, that was like the best thing that happened to him. Got his side back, let's follow this guy because he can do stuff. It's probably good going to happen here. But the disciples didn't understand any more than Bartimaeus did that Jesus had work to go do right down the road. It's not that many miles from Jericho to Jerusalem, folks. It's not very miles at all. A little twisty road through some foothills, and there you are. And Bartimaeus probably did experience what the disciples did with Jesus in Jerusalem when all that happened. We're coming upon a time where we're going to take a look at why it is that we need Jesus, why we needed Him to come. Right now we know that He's headed to Jerusalem, and we know that in spite of Jesus' best efforts, the disciples really don't get it. And as a preacher, sometimes I wonder if all the sermons preached, if people don't get it. I don't know. No more than Jesus did. Because Jesus has this innate ability to kind of know what y'all are thinking, and I don't. That's probably a good thing. I'd be depressed and quit. Anyway, the point is that just like the disciples didn't always get it, we don't always get it. And then immediately, that word, in the context of our faith and what Jesus does, outside of our understanding, the disciples left their nets, and Bartimaeus followed Jesus. Outside of those instances, immediately doesn't really hit home to us too much. And it comes to faith matters. Now, I'll get around to it. I got this appointment. I got that appointment. And yeah, I think I want to go hang out down there for a minute. And, my car needs wash. I'm going to run by the car wash. I got to go to the grocery store and pick up a couple things. Or million and one things. But what would happen if Jesus suddenly opened our eyes? Would we immediately do something? Would we? And what will we do? That's something to ponder, isn't it? What if Jesus suddenly opened our eyes? What will we do? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.